Hello, my name is Danielle Kakamo, and this is my fourth reflection for Fostering Innovation Through Leadership class. And the first question asks, what does Grant mean by horizontal hostility, and give one example? So what I understood horizontal hostility to be was, as psychologist Judith Blythe proposed, there was a hostility between the minor differences between radical groups and the more moderate mainstream groups. And this was just because extremists tend to be a little protective and of their values, and they think that anyone that doesn't share the same extreme values as them is a threat to their group, and basically popularizing the wrong kind of ideas, and can be seen as imposters or sellouts to the cause. So one example is that I thought was funny is that vegans tend to be pretty hostile toward vegetarians, and in a study they were 30 times more hostile than vegetarians were towards vegans. So that's kind of like an interesting unidirectional effect of horizontal hostility, and two groups that to the majority of people would seem pretty similar, should get along, but vegans don't really like vegetarians because I think that they're fake vegans. They're like not dedicated enough, and so it's not bi-directional. And then something that I thought of in my personal life as an example was I go to a lot of concerts and EDM concerts, and it's really funny how like snooty some people can be about the type of music that they listen to. So like, you know, it became very popularized, and you could just be like a fake follower, a bandwagon, or like not really into it. There's like techno snobs and all different types of classes of the EDM community. But basically, if you're just like a bandwagoner, you're threatening the values and the family and community of the group by being fake. So I thought that was a cool example. And then the next question is talking about how Grant argues that transparency is not always the best policy, and that enemies make better allies than frenemies. And if I agree with these, and why or why not. So for the less transparency thing, I think I pretty much agree with that for the most part. This is a really good tool for overcoming skepticism, which is a lot of times something that originals have to do, is they're putting forward a new idea that nobody has ever heard of before. And this is especially useful if you are going forward with someone that you know to be closed-minded. The less transparency, the less information you give them might be better for them to invest in your cause. And then this is a form of tempered radicalism because it kind of hides your radicalism inside of a Trojan horse of like the status quo. People are more comfortable with what's familiar, and if you're just offering like a radical idea, they might not get on board right away. But if you put your foot in the door, so to say, you can get a lot more from them. And then the reasons why I don't really like this is just because I personally really like understanding the why of the situation, so I would feel a little bit cheated by like, I feel like I would be asking but why, and then if somebody wasn't telling me, I would feel a little like sketchy about that. It seems a little sneaky. And then something like along that line, to what extent is this approach like dishonest? It's kind of like dishonesty through omittance. And then as we learned, you know, trust is really important in that pyramid bottom level foundation. So I think there's like has to be a balance between how much transparency you're willing to go forward with, and then for building that foundation of trust. Because if you're not transparent with an idea and it falls through and doesn't work, and people, you know, have invested in you and put their time and resources into you, and you weren't completely honest with them from the beginning, like that could really backfire on you, I feel like. But if it all works out, like, it's good, right? So anyway, The other part of this question was that your enemies are actually better than frenemies. And I'm a little like lost on this one. I don't really agree with it just because like I'm not really completely sure what a frenemy is. The closest thing I can think of is like a family member that you don't really like, but they're your family, so you have to spend time with them and you have to like them. But as far as like your personal life goes, I don't know. I feel like you should just, sever ties with people that don't really serve you in a good way. But anyway, so the theory is basically that there's less emotional energy invested with people who are inconsistent versus people who are like just consistently bad to you, which I don't really agree with that because like everybody's inconsistent to an extent. Like you can't have a friend and never get in like in a disagreement with them or like not see eye to eye or get in an argument. Like that's always going to happen. So I don't really understand like to what extent does a friend fall into the group of a frenemy. Like so I think it's just like very situational. And then the other thing is that we have this instinct to sever the bad relationships and then salvage the ambivalent ones. But as I mentioned earlier, there's situations where you're stuck in a bad relationship, like I mentioned family or maybe at work, like you have a boss that really doesn't respect you and treats you wrong. Like obviously there's ways to work around that and get out of that, but that can be a really hard situation. So I think that like working under a boss that's bad to you is definitely a more emotionally exerting experience than like having a friend that like is occasionally rude to you. I don't know. So I'm not sure if I really agree with that completely. And that like people that have supported us all along aren't as good of allies as people who were first our enemies and then our allies. And I kind of have a personal experience with that because I had my best friend's boyfriend used to hate me, and just recently, like after years, he actually ended up going to rehab, which might have had something to do with it, but then he came back and like we ended up becoming friends. But I don't know, I still would like not trust him as much as my other friends that have always supported me, so I don't really relate to that one when I think of like a personal example. But then two more ideas that weren't discussed above that I was interested in were the shared tactics were better than shared values sometimes, which is really interesting because I would have never thought of that myself, and thought I could really I understood like what they were saying by it and it made sense. So I like that idea that like the methods and means shared by a group can be more important than the values that the group is sharing. And I think it's really important because it gives you the opportunity to gain unexpected support and expand your audience and your cause to new audiences, that wouldn't originally have access to your ideas, which makes your group stronger, ideas stronger. And then the other thing I liked was that the moderate radicalism made for the best results, which was, I mentioned it earlier, the tempered radicalism. And the example that I really liked was how Occupy Wall Street could have been way more successful if they had gone with named the 99%, and that it was all just like caught up in the name, and this was the real fatal error to the thing. Because I actually think about this cause all the time, and I'm like, why don't I ever hear about the Occupy Wall Street anymore? Like, what about us? What about the 99%? Like, all these problems are still real, but there's no like unified cause anymore. And I thought that that had a lot of energy behind it, but then it just kind of fizzled out, and I'm like, why did it do that? And apparently, like, the name had such a big deal for it because 99 is an inclusive, and Occupy Wall Street suggests a more radical thing, which kind of reminds me of like the Black Panthers versus Martin Luther King people, which obviously we know which one was more successful in fighting that cause. But anyway, I'm a little bit over time, so I gotta go, and I'll see you in class. Thank you.